Welcome back, everybody. Doug Kyle Holtz here. This is my FTH 212 Module 5 reflection assignment. We got to go through this real fast because we got a bunch of stuff we've got to try and knock out in 10 minutes. Today is a 3-part process. So starting part 1, let's put on our eye pro so that our eyes are safe, and we will go ahead and clear the weapon. All right, source of feed has been empty, was continuously empty whenever I came into this and made sure things were good to go. All right, so nothing inside the weapon, no ammunition on or around my table. We're going to start off with part 1, disassemble this thing, or actually talk through all the things that we would inspect on this to assess the health of the weapon if it were to walk into the shop today. I'll go ahead and move everything around and we'll get set up. Okay, with the slide fully disassembled, we're going to start looking at everything back again in reverse order. So we'll go through, we want to look at the extractor, and where we're looking at the actual face of the claw. We want to make sure that there's no burrs, it's not broken off or anything like that, so it actually grabs the rim and extracts. We're also going to look at our spring for our striker safety, make sure it's not bent, kinked or anything, all right, because that'll potentially cause issues with this safety for the striker. All right, so we get everything there. We'll leave the spring in place. For our extractor, we want to look at the extractor, depressor, plunger, and the plunger spring, and then our roller bearing here on the end. Make sure all 3 are good to go. Also, that spring is not kinked, damaged, worn, anything like that, just like any other spring. Our guide rod and recoil spring assembly, same thing. We want to make sure that, 1, it's tight. We want to make sure that there's nothing coming loose on it and there's no damage to or any, garage gunsmithing jobs to any of the ends of the spring here. For our striker, we want to make sure that, 1, it's rounded, it's complete, it's all there. There's not too much wear and tear on there, showing that it's been beat up by recoil or anything along those lines. We also want to make sure the spring's in good working order. Also, again, look for any type of modifications to the spring. And then our striker sear surface here, we want to make sure is good to go. It's kind of rounded over on top, which it's supposed to be, but you want to make sure it's smooth, free of any burrs, anything that can hang up on the trigger sear or the actual sear. And then our plastic collar here, we want to make sure is good to go. All right, for our back plate, something I noticed today is that I've got a small amount of raised plastic on the inside here. That's another thing to look for here. If you go to the Glock factory with a Glock firearm, they'll tell you do not put one of the metal back plates on here due to the components internally. They'll wear themselves down a heck of a lot faster with plastic beating against metal than plastic on plastic. Okay. When we get to our barrel, we want to check a couple things. We have our locking surfaces here. All right, we want to make sure there's no wear, raised metal, so on and so forth. We also have our indentations here for our guide rod recoil assembly. We want to make sure those aren't burred, have issues, things like that. There's no unnatural wear and tear. As we look around the crown, we're looking for any type of dings, dents, any damage, wear, things like that could affect around traveling out, since it's the last surface that it has before it takes off into flight. We're also going to look at our chamber surface to make sure there's no issues. We want to look at our locking surface up top here to make sure there's no issues, no raised metal, any unnatural wear and tear. And we also want to make sure there's nothing wrong with our barrel hood here. Lastly, we're going to go through and inspect our feed ramp to make sure it's, 1, the proper angle, 2, it's got the proper finish to it. You can always smooth it up and so on, but if it comes from the factory with the mirror finish, don't touch it. Lastly, I'm just going to look around. You could possibly get a concentricity gauge or a micrometer to make sure there's no barrel bulges, but you could also use a patch to do so. And I think the very final thing, I'm going to end up having to buy one, but I need to get a bore scope so I can go through and check out the look on the lands and grooves and get an actual mid-barrel look at it, as opposed to just looking through the bore or the chamber and then looking through the muzzle. All right. When we get back over to the actual slide, we want to go through and look at, first off, our barrel wear surfaces, if you will. We have our locking surface here, which is our top locking surface. We want to make sure that's good to go. Flipping it over, we're going to look at our serrations, make sure that they're good to go. They're not worn down. They're not having issues with being caked up with gunk. I mean, it's a cleanliness thing, really. We're also going to look at our sights, make sure that they're not loose, and that all the components for the sights are in place the way they're supposed to be. I also need to inspect my rails, make sure they're free of debris, dirt, raised metal, anything that could cause issues to the rails on the frame. So I want to make sure they're good to go. I need to check out my slide notch, my slide lock notch right here to make sure there's no raised metal or anything that could cause it not to actually lock up when the slide lock moves into place off the frame. We also need to go through and check our breech face. With the extractor removed, it's pretty good to go, so we can go through and make sure things are straight on there. Another thing that wasn't really talked about is on this corner here where the extractor sits on the slide. That's where a lot of your carbon will build up, especially for people that shoot a lot, like competition shooters. That will be one of those pains in the butt you just got to get to. It's easier to break it down and scrub it free than anything. All right, so that's going to be it, with the exception, I'll show you the striker safety check that we need to do to make sure we're good to go on the slide. One last thing I forgot to mention on the slide before we put it back together and check the safety on it is you want to check down inside and make sure there's no issues inside the channel liner here for the striker. Anything that could impede the striker or anything that could cause it to hang up will mess with the operation of the weapon. Okay. We want to check our headspace as well. So what we're going to do is we took out the recoil spring and guide rod assembly, and we're going to go ahead and start off with our, whoop, that's our no-go. Let's start with go. Go goes in. We slide it in past the extractor. All right, we have full lock up on top for our locking surfaces. Everything is even, so go is good to go. All right, let's go ahead and pull that one out. No go. We're going to try and do the same thing, slide it right past the extractor, but it will not get full lockup. The barrel is still depressed, and we do have a significant gap there, so we know that our headspace is correct. Another thing we could do, mount our slide back into our vise, and we would use our rod, our cleaning rod with the adapter or the actual eyelet on the end of it, and we would get our barrel measurement for the barrel length from the crown here, basically, of the muzzle all the way to the breech face. So we would use that. We could also get our twist ratio, if not printed on the barrel, just to check it and make sure we were good to go. We talked about that in a previous class. It would be identical to what we did and what we need to do with the revolver. We would just rinse and repeat to get the same information. So, okay, now that we've got everything disassembled, we'll go through and talk through the frame. We want to check our pinholes here, and we also want to look at our pins. All right, so we have roll pins here that we want to make sure that if anybody disassembled this themselves to clean it, they didn't use the wrong type of punches and so on and mar those up. If they're completely destroyed, we may have to replace these. These are good things to keep on hand as well if you have a lot of weapons walking in the door that need various sizes or identical sizes. We also want to look at our takedown lever. We're going to look and make sure this thing actually works properly. We want to check our spring, all right, to make sure there's no issues. And we want to make sure there's nothing broken on here because it's also a portion of the locking surface here for the locking block. Speaking of the locking block, we've got it completely taken down now. We can look at our pinholes on this, our top surfaces for locking and whatnot, and then we also have the front pinhole to check on. This also has a portion of the integrated rails on it, so we can get a better look at that and make sure there's no issues with it. When we get over here to our ejector, we can check that, make sure that the geometry is correct on that. And then we can look at our disconnector channel, make sure there's no issues in there like raised plastic and so on. Our pinhole, very same thing. And then here we have our drop safety slot, basically, for our trigger for the drop safety. We want to make sure there's nothing impeding that, no raised plastic and so on. Coming over to the trigger, we have our reset spring. We want to make sure that's good to go. We have our sear, our drop safety. So again, we can get a look on all sides of this to make sure the geometry is correct. We also have wearing surfaces here for our trigger bar on the for the disconnector and so on. We'll make sure this thing is completely properly in the right geometry and so on, and it moves correctly. We also want to make sure, depending on the model, that the hinge pins are working correctly and that the safety is working correctly, which we'll show you here momentarily whenever we do, we already showed you whenever we did our functions check, both dry and with dummy rounds. Okay, so with our disconnector, we're looking for wear points on this as well. Also, the bend is correct. It's not creating issues whenever the manipulation of the weapon is going on. As the slide starts moving back, the disconnector does separate away from the trigger bar. And then our slide latch, or our slide catch latch, we want to make sure that the spring is in the proper geometry, that it's not broken, worn, anything like that. And we want to make sure that when it is assembled, that it does fall back into place the way it's supposed to and not hang up and constantly impede the movement of the slide, locking it every time that you fire. Besides that, that's basically what you have for the frame to go through, with a few other exceptions. We want to look at any modifications that happen and make sure the structural integrity of the frame is still good to go. Additionally, with what I posted a couple times about the rails and so on, make sure there's no type of excessive wear. Make sure no one polished those because it does not need to happen. Another favorite thing that people are doing now, especially with organ defense, is you can get additional pieces of plastic to completely cut off and melt with a bandsaw saw or skill saw, or correction, not a skill saw, but with a jigsaw, and you can actually mate up and belt a flat back to this and so on, and make it even shorter, make it more 1911 profile style with it being a straight grip. So big thing, any mods too, you want to make sure they don't affect your mag release. All right, so we're going to look at the state of the spring on that, the tension on it, and so on, and make sure it's good to go. Besides that, you have your trigger pocket. Just look in there, make sure there's no excessive wear inside there as well, dust, dirt, debris, and so on. That's it for the frame. Okay, starting off with our functions check. All right, we're going to go ahead and charge the weapon real quick to make sure it's good to go, and I'm going to check the safety. So without actually depressing the bottom portion of the trigger to engage the safety, I want to make sure the weapon doesn't fire. Okay, now I'm going to try to get it to fire. It does fire when I engage the safety. So let's go through, charge it one more time, check it one more time. Nothing if I don't engage the bottom portion of the trigger. All right, this time I'm going to pull to the rear and hold, and I'm going to check my return after I charge it. All right, so this is my reset right there. Trigger squeeze again. Try it one more time. Click. Pull it again. All right, next thing I want to do is go through, and we're going to check our magazine to make sure we have lock up. All right, so we did hit lock right there, charging the weapon to, or pulling the slide to the rear. So we know that it's going to lock up. All right, with the safety here, we'll check it one more time now that we have a magazine to make sure nothing's interfering. Shouldn't anyways. All right, we're going to pull it to the rear, charge it one more time, slide forward. All right, now what I want to do is I'm going to take this thing and slightly pull it out of battery, and it should not fire. All right, but now it does once I put it back. So we know for a fact we're good to go. Next thing I want to do is go through and do a dummy round test before I go, if I have the ability to go live fire test. Okay, this is going to be our dummy round functions check here. So I've got 3 snap caps in. All right, go ahead and charge the weapon. It's good to go. All right, pull the trigger. I'm going to go ahead and continue to hold to the rear. It extracted the first round, got reset, pull the trigger. It extracted the second round, reset, pull the trigger, and it extracted the third round, and we got back to a lock position. So the weapon will function for everything except for fire until I actually take it out and test fire it. Okay, for part 2, I had to write this down just so I could remember, but we're talking about 10 things that we learned. So for me, I've always purchased ready-to-go Glocks, so I've never installed the takedown lever. That was very different, and so I'm glad I got to do that because I was always terrified to take that one piece out thinking I would break it, which it's actually the spring. The next thing would be installing the channel liner for the striker channel. Again, that comes with the Glock ready to go. I've never replaced one, so that was really cool, getting the tool for that and getting to do that. And then trying to find the beveled end. That was a little different. Assembling the extractor, plunger, depressor, rod, spring, and roller bearing assembly. Again, that comes completely together from Glock, and I've never done that before, so that was very, very satisfying to do that and see where it went. The next would be the recoil spring and guide rod assembly. Again, those all come pre-assembled. I've never taken one apart, never done anything with it because I've never had a need to. Let's see. The actual history of the striker-fired weapon would be number 5 for me because, like an idiot, thinking through some of the other courses, I don't remember ever talking about the first ever weapon. I just remember talking about the history of Glock's weapons and so on. Number 6, troubleshooting like a gunsmith. Just like in revolvers, I love the fact that you went through and forced us to think like gunsmiths as opposed to go through and just kind of nerding out on the things that we only know. Getting that process in place will help me exponentially in the future. Let's see. I already got that. Number 7, how to spot dangerous or smart mods, or not smart mods, I should say. I posted about this, but looking for the garage gunsmith changes, modifications, and so on, and documenting those and letting people know, like, hey, this thing's probably not, like, this needs to be taken out and destroyed. Let's see. Number 8, we already covered the recoil guide spring assembly, or guide rod assembly. So number 9, how to make borders while stippling. I had some hiccups here and there, but it still ended up being fun. It took me a while to realize that the right tool for the right job every time. Don't substitute anything else. All right, and then lastly, it would be the cycle of operations for this platform in comparison to other handguns and other weapons that I know. It's not that it doesn't go through all 8 steps. It goes through all 8 steps of the cycle of operation, but it's the order with which it does it that makes it very unique as opposed to a revolver, as opposed to a bolt-action rifle, and so on, because this is a semi-automatic pistol. It's going through several steps at once, or it's partially going through steps while other steps are going on. So it was really cool to see that. Yeah, I guess we'll say number 10. I'm gonna have to learn how to take this freaking magazine apart, because it's just, this thing is a conundrum. You take the floor plate off and nothing really happens. It's kind of crazy. So we take off the magazine floor plate, and this is what we're left with. So I'm gonna have to like get pliers and pry down on that, and maybe slide forward or pull apart. I have no idea. I've never seen a magazine like this before. With a Glock, you remove the plate, it's got an additional plate down here, and that thing just moves out of the way, and you've got it disassembled. But yeah, been a fun course. Ready to proceed to the next thing. To try and maintain proficiency at these, I've, just like during the revolver class, I've gone through and created an Excel spreadsheet. I'm still modifying that and tailoring it to actually fit the visual inspection, document all information as it's coming in, to include owner's information and whatnot, so that I have that stuff readily available. And then I have a record on file as to what I have done to this, but also what I've noticed as it came into the shop, what was already done to it, and so on. And that's something I will bounce it off of every time it walks back into the shop, to make sure that it's good to go, that none of the other modifications were done by somebody else, and the weapon's still safe. For part 3 modification that I would like to do to this, I'm going to do an actual trigger job on this. I've never gone through and done a trigger job on a Glock, because I've always just bought aftermarket Glock parts. I've never really seen a need to do so. My original Glock 19 I put probably 6,000 rounds through it in the first year while I worked at sniper school, and it was basically my duty gun there while I was there, because a lot of us competed to, we would go to competitions to keep our name in the game. As the sniper school and whatnot. So I know that firing a weapon like this tons and tons of times will actually soften everything up. The nicest trigger I've got, actually, out of all the triggers I've bought for Glocks and so on, is my Glock 19 trigger, because it's got probably way too many rounds on it without ever being replaced, modified, so on and so forth. So with this kind of being a cheaper version of everything, and I'm not knocking it, but it's baseline edition and everything, I wasn't too concerned after getting started with the stippling and whatnot. So it was like, all right, man, let's do the border. Let's rock and roll. If I mess this up, I mess it up. You know, it wasn't a gun that I was going to cherish at the top of my list anyways. It was a means to an end, if you will, for the course. So I'll go through and do the trigger job on this and see how it comes out. Because when I did the revolver, I talked with Dr. D about the, what's the word I'm looking for here? The issues with the drop test, length of arm, weight of hammer, angle, how hard you umph it, all that stuff when trying to re-engage or reapply a 6-foot drop test. It's not standardized. It's very subjective. And so that's my concern when doing trigger jobs, is that it's way too subjective with just using a mallet to hit it. I got it. We can't take every gun up and drop it 6 feet off a ladder to see if it actually fires. But there has to be some way to actually get the appropriate amount of force at the appropriate point to make sure that the trigger job was done correctly. I'll do it on this again. I'm not trying to get a Glock 18 out of this, because that's illegal, and I don't want the law to come in and take anything away from me because I messed something up. I'm going to try it on this, but most likely, if it ever comes down to doing trigger jobs for a customer, like we said with liability, probably won't happen. I will just change out the components to make sure it's still in working order, and then it goes through all of the safeties, doesn't modify any of them or stop any of them. And that's my Module 5 assignment. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'm getting ready to go into firing pin fired pistols. I guess we have a CZ75 clone that we're going to be utilizing, but I also picked up a 1911 to learn on, because it's one platform I'm just greatly in need of learning on. So we're going to continue with the videos even after the course ends. So follow me along with the 1911 here in a couple weeks, and hopefully we get brain big and get smarter at it. Thank you.